no problem. Okay, we now have the appearance of a quorum. This is John. I'll call the meeting to order. Brenda, if you'll take roll for us.
Absolutely. Board member Roth.
I'm here.
Board member Ridley.
Present.
Board member Mercier.
Present.
Board member Boriski.
Present.
Board member Freeman. Council member Woodward. Council member Anderson.
Present.
Mayor Sierra. Vice Chair Hubernick. I know he's here.
Chuck, you're on mute.
Sorry, present.
Okay. Chair Moore.
Present. All right, thank you. Moving on to our first order of business, the approval of last meeting's minutes. We're going to tighten up our process a little bit this week or this month, and really the minutes, you should only vote on the minutes if you were present at that meeting. So I'm going to actually ask for abstentions for the record as well, as when we go to vote on this for anyone who missed the last meeting. So with that said, can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the board meeting from April 12th?
I move.
Moved.
Did you get that, Brenda?
I think it was a tie between Don and Caitlin. Caitlin?
Okay.
I'll take Caitlin.
Okay. Caitlin moved, Don seconded. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, and then abstentions.
All abstain.
Sounds good. All right, thank you very much. Well, so the trivia was, we barely made a quorum. It stayed at just that, 6 people. Then we would have voted on this. If Ty had to stay out of it, I don't think we could have done the vote. We would have carried it to the next meeting and then done it next time, but it all pulled together. All right, let's see. Brenda, is there anyone here for the public forum?
No, we don't have any public comment at this time.
Perfect. All right, so new business. We'll start with 5A, the award of contract for services with BioVelocity LLC for the Allen Water Treatment Plant South Reservoir Dredging Project. And Steve, I believe the mic is yours.
Thank you, Chair Moore. Is everyone able to view the presentation?
Yes.
Great. So this item before board recommendation is for a recommendation for council approval of the dredging services at the Allen Water Treatment Plant. So here we have the Allen Water Treatment Plant. Part of the treatment process is removal of solids that are contained in the raw water supply to the treatment plant. This is performed through 2 processes: clarification and filtrations. Solids removed as part of that process are pumped into the South Reservoir. You can see within the South Reservoir, there's actually a line that runs down the middle that's pretty visually obvious. That's a curtain wall that's in there. So all the solids that are removed at the treatment plant are placed into that western cell to the left of that curtain wall. Eventually the water will flow over the curtain wall, and then eventually that actually gets pumped up to the North Reservoir, where it can be returned to the plant for treatment. And so over time, those solids are going to build up within that western cell. The rate that we produce solids actually exceeds our current capacity to remove them. So over time, those solids are building up, and that's been occurring over the course of decades. So our internal processes are that we dredge out the solids, which is basically you can think of it as like a vacuum process, and that's pulling those solids out of that western cell, sending them to the dewatering building, where the water is actually squeezed out of the solids. and then they're placed into those drying beds for hauling off. And this is a schematic representation of that. So again, we have solids that are produced as part of the clarification and filtration processes. We have a pump station that pumps those over into the south reservoir. Those are pulled out of that pond and through the belt filter press. That's the piece of equipment that's located inside that dewatering facility. And again, it's essentially a squeezing process that removes the water. Those solids are then spread in our drying beds where they can do some additional drying just by exposure to the atmosphere. Then they're placed in trucks and hauled out to landfill. So the need for this is that reservoir is approaching capacity. I mentioned that these solids have been building up over the course of decades and that we're unable to remove them at the same rate that they're produced. And so we're actually getting close to reservoir capacity. And what can happen when we reach that capacity, it can impact our treatment process. The solids management is a critical part of that treatment process. It can also have water quality impacts. I mentioned that the water from the western cells spills over that wall and then can go up into the north reservoir where it can be returned to the plant. If we're filling up that basin with solids, some of those solids can actually carry over, and we don't want that to happen. So staff solicited a competitive procurement for this. We procured it as a fixed price of $200,000. The competitive nature of the procurement was who can remove the most solids for that fixed cost. So 4 contractors responded to the solicitation. BioVelocity came in with the most solids that we'll be able to remove for that $200,000 fixed price. They also came to us with the experience regionally and elsewhere doing this type of work. So the selection panel recommended moving forward with BioVelocity. In terms of project execution, pending successful approval of the contract, we will be getting the work this summer. We expect about a 3-month duration with the solids volume that our preferred, a recommended contractor can remove. We estimate that we're going to be able to remove about 70% of the solids that are in that pond. So there will be one more cycle of this next year to get those remaining solids removed. We're also evaluating our long-term solids management plan. So I mentioned that we're unable to remove at the same rate we're producing. So we're going to look at that current process and see if it makes sense to continue that process, and which would require an intermittent contracting of solids removal, or if we potentially want to adjust the capacity so we can more closely match that. So that concludes my presentation, Chair. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'll throw in. Oh, actually, Joe, go ahead. I see your hand raised.
Thank you, John, and thanks for the presentation, Steve. What are in those solids? Is there anything that's hazardous in any way, and what's the removal timeline and process like for finally getting those out of the drying bed and on to wherever they go next?
So in terms of what's actually in the water itself, it's naturally occurring organics and other constituents. So we draw our water from the Platte River or through City Ditch, all of which are sourced from Chatfield Reservoir. So a lot of naturally occurring constituents in the water. There is some from the water we take out of the Platte River. There is some effluent that contributes to what's contained in that. But in terms of, and I'll speak to this a little bit in the hauling, but I'll go ahead and touch on it now. We did look at T-norms, which are technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive material. And so some of you that are familiar with the history of this know that that's something that's been exists within a portion of our water supply. So we actually tested for the presence of that and found that those levels would allow us to take the dried solids to a non-hazardous landfill. So that was really good news for us.
Thank you.
I think that covers the gist of my question. Is it that the alum that we've had difficulty getting rid of in the past? Is that what I was recalling, where we have had a bit above the levels that needed, so that it had to go to special landfills?
I believe it
really matter.
I believe it was the T-norms, and I can check on the alum, but again, the good news was we had a test for that, and we were able to confirm that it can go to a non-hazardous.
Yeah, but perfect. All right, great. That is very
Yeah.
good news. Any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any. So can I get a motion to recommend that City Council approve by motion a CFS with BioVelocity in the amount of $200,000 with an additional 10% staff managed contingency of $20,000 for a total project authorization of $220,000.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? And abstentions? All right, motion carries. All right, thank you, Steve. 5B, award of a CFS with Radiation Pros LLC for the AWTP Residuals Removal, Hauling and Disposal Services.
Thank you, Chair. That will be me again. So this is the second part of the work that you had just approved. This is the actually hauling off of those dried solids. So BioVelocity will do the removal. They'll do the dewatering. They'll do the replacement of in our drying beds. Then it needs to be hauled off to landfill. So this is that separate contract to cover that portion. So it's pretty simple. It involves a hauling company to come in, collect all the solids that are in the drying beds, and that's actually this area right here, and then haul that out to landfill. Again, the good news was we tested this to ensure that we could take it to a non-hazardous landfill, and the good news is the testing confirmed that. We expect that hauling to occur over a 2-week interval. So what's going to happen over time is we're going to start filling up this area here, and once it gets to a certain point where we're nearing capacity, we'll call on the haulers to come in and take that on to landfill, empty out that space, and so we can continue our solids removing process. That price does include, the price that's part of this contract does include the disposal at the landfill. So again, we went through a competitive procurement process for this. The tier 1 and tier 2 is that's indicative of what type of landfill it needs to go to. So tier 1 is a non-hazardous, tier 2 was a hazardous. So Radiation Pros actually bid on both. The other company that submitted a bid only submitted on tier 2 and actually came out at a substantially higher price. So what we'll be looking at is that tier 1 cost. Again, we had a panel that prepared the recommendation based on value and based on success in performing similar work. So staff did recommend going forward with Radiation Pros. And that concludes this portion of the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions on the hauling aspect of this project.
Any questions? So Steve, I'll slide in a question, although it might have been better on the prior one, but you mentioned this will take care of 70% of it. Is there not, economies of scale that would warrant just getting the other 30% done now as well, or is that not a significant concern?
I don't think it's a significant concern at this point. Another part is that 70% is an estimate. And so we went and did some analysis, which required taking samples at different locations throughout the pond to estimate that. Some of the feedback we got from the contractors is that this is more, how much can be removed for a fixed cost is I guess is a fairly common approach to this type of work. So given the relative uncertainty of how accurate that 70% is, was the recommendation to stick with the fixed cost of $200,000.
All right, perfect, thank you. Not seeing any questions, then I'll ask for a motion to recommend that City Council approve by motion a CFS with Radiation Pros in the amount of $188,250 with an additional 10% staff managed contingency of $18,825 for a total project authorization of $207,075. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Okay, second.
I'll second.
Further discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Abstain? All right, motion carries. All right, on to 5C Utilities 2022 Customer Survey and Taste and Odor Study. Sarah and Steve.
So I'll go ahead and kick us off. Thank you, Chair. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we sent out our first annual customer survey back in February, or with the February bills. So we thought we'd bring those results to you tonight, as well as the taste, odor, and hardness study key findings. We thought these paired well together, and this is just an informational item. So I'll go ahead and start with the annual survey results, and then Steve will take over and discuss the taste, odor, and hardness key findings. So our annual drinking water survey ran from February 1st of this year to March 31st. It was sent in the February utility bills to customers, and we provided a link to an online form that could also be filled out, as well as provided hard copies at city facilities. So customers had several places to grab one of these and then also to return them. We received a total number of responses of 1,331, and just over half of those were hard copy, and the rest were received online. The next several slides are the results by question, and we combined the responses that we received from online as well as hard copy data into one to go ahead and pull this together in this presentation. Although you do have in your packet the results from the online survey, and now those were just the online responses. So a couple interesting things to note on these two questions is that about 40% have lived in Inglewood from within the last 5 years, and then about 40% have lived here over 40 years or over 20 years. And then 63% of our respondents said that they do drink Inglewood water. And how the water was rated in this next question, question 3, 50% responded that it was poor, while about 40% rated it as average to excellent. And I think, as to be expected, nearly 3/4 of the respondents do use a device to filter tap water into their home. Okay. The respondents were split on whether or not they buy bottled water. And then from the next couple questions are related to the aesthetics of the water. So when asked if customers had experienced discoloration in their water in the past 6 months, 62% said they had not. And then addressing the taste and odor in the past year, this is asking really for any noticeable improvements. And this provides us with a baseline of where customers' opinions of the water, taste, and odor are currently. And we're hoping to then trend the answers to these questions over the coming years as we start to invest in the capital that's addressing these specific issues. So as you can see, there's the majority of the respondents to both of these questions indicated that they had seen no change in their taste or odor of their water, and there were no really responses that indicated any kind of significant improvement. So turning to the cost of services, we asked a couple questions related to the cost of water. So related to the cost of delivered Inglewood drinking water to customers' homes or businesses, the question was framed in that the cost of delivering water is less than a penny per gallon as it's delivered to your home or business. So the majority of the respondents did say that it was almost 70% that rated the cost of water from fair to excellent, with only 26% rating it poor to unacceptable and 5% not answering. And then when asked what they were willing to pay, as you can see here, 23% said less than a penny, but 52% said they'd be willing to pay more than a penny, and 25% didn't respond. On the hard copy surveys, we were able to get a little additional anecdotal information because several people wrote comments such as they'd be willing to pay more if the water tasted better. We asked one question related to sewer, and that's just the cost of sewer. Largely it was responded as good or excellent, with less than 20% of respondents saying that it was poor or unacceptable. We had two open-ended questions. One was just asking what people might be willing to pay for bottled water, and that ranged between a penny per gallon to $3 per gallon. Some of the other written responses to that were, not applicable or don't buy, and then should not have to buy. And then as we left quite a bit of room on the hard copies, and then in the online form for any additional comments that people would like to provide to us. And the common themes were related to the cost of water, as well as, to be expected, the taste, odor, and hardness of the water. In your packet, that Polco report did include all of the written responses that we received, and then we compiled the hard copy responses and transcribed them to be included at the end of that Polco report. So you also have anything that was written that we could read. One of the questions, or one of the things that we did see in the written responses is people questioning whether the cost of water really is less than a penny per gallon. So I just wanted to present to the board how we got to that calculation. So the water bill components include the capital improvement fee at $15 a month for a residential customer, the admin fee, which is $3.08 per month, and then the usage rate is $3.58 per month. And for a customer that uses 6,000 gallons, that usage charge would equal $21.48 for a total bill of $39.56 for 1 month. And so then dividing that by 6,000 gallons, you get less than a penny per gallon for the cost of water. So I'll pause here before turning it over to Steve for any questions on the survey, or I'm happy to just move on to the taste, odor, and hardness findings.
Any questions for Sarah? I'm not seeing any. We can keep going.
Okay.
I have a question. Actually, sorry.
Go ahead.
So as far as the fact that the water is so poor tasting for such a large number of people who responded, does that just mean that there's aging infrastructure within the homes, or is that just also the source water too? Is it like a combination?
It could be a combination. Anecdotally, we're hearing that the taste of the water, people don't like the taste of the water anywhere. One of the updates I'd like to make to the survey for next year, now that City Council has adopted the neighborhood names and mapping, I'd like to add that. So if we could start getting an idea of where in the city people are responding and where they're experiencing taste and odor issues.
Yeah, I think to add to that, it's not a simple singular answer on this one. We think the source water quality is a big part of it. We also are looking at ways that we optimize the movement of water through the distribution system, because that can play a factor into it if we're not moving it as efficiently. So we have another aspect of this, which is the whole operations piece. And so I think when you add those combined with the aging infrastructure, just the pipe infrastructure, and to your point, the home infrastructure over time does deteriorate over time. We think there are a whole number of factors to this. We think the most significant of those right out of the gate is likely the source water, because that's really where the hardness comes from, and that's really where a lot of the odor comes from, is from the time of year when we pull it from Union Ave.
Ty, then Marjan?
Yeah, I'm just curious if you considered asking questions about people being owners, renters, have recently moved from, say, Denver, a water supply with a lower TDS. Maybe it's less that it's just the difference comparing those two versus people who have been around longer and are more used to it. Is that something that you guys considered?
We did not necessarily consider that for this one. We were trying to get a baseline on what people just thought in general. But yeah, agreed. It's such a subjective, thing, whether or not people like the taste of water and have lived here or are coming from other places that have different tastes in water. So certainly something we can consider adding for next year's survey.
Yeah, it could be a future refinement to parts of the survey. But one of the things we did with the survey when we were putting together the questions is we wanted to make it short enough that we thought people would answer it, but enough breadth of information that we could get a sense for what people thought. And then frankly, part of it was I don't think that people necessarily know how much water costs to have it delivered directly to your house. And so we wanted to get some of those questions in there so that people start to get somewhat of an education of what it really does cost and how much water does cost delivered to the house.
Marjan?
Then thank you for taking my question. And I just was wondering, as far as the people's perception of what they taste and odor is, that creates a little bit more complication in the formula, where if we can look at the source, where the source come, and we're looking at the outcome of people's perception of what taste and odor is, and considering like how many people take beverages that are so toxic and they think they taste good. It really is a parameter that is not, it's hard to put a measurement to it. Where if we already having a hard time of figuring out where the source is coming. For instance, if you look at for residents that are behind the reservoir, we can actually taste and see the outcome. Like I can see when my plants die, when the mixture of the reservoir is mixed, the actual source water is mixed with the reservoir, you can actually not only smell it, see it, you see it on your dishes, and you actually see the outcome of it on your plants. The question becomes so if you look at somebody that actually live in another district that is further away from the source water, they might not feel that, because by the time it gets to their space is a lot of stuff is dissipating, it can kind of settle down. But the question is that that is just would be, to me, is a waste of energy it's important to see that eventually, but we don't even have the beginning test. For instance, when you are having the source water is coming, let's say somewhere from where I don't have exactly the map in front of me, but when you can see where the waste management dumps in that space, if you can get a sample from before waste management dumping, you get a sample of that, and then you get it right after that they dump, then you can actually have a solid data. That data is workable. Then you can figure it out where this contamination is coming from. And then you can get another sample after that it comes to it got cleaned up. And then you can see, okay, so now what kind of a hardness do we have at this point? Those are solid data. And if we actually purchase the equipment, it's not a really expensive equipment. You can actually get that, and you can simply figure that out in one day. The question is, yes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
I just have a hard time understanding why is this such an obstacle? Why couldn't this be done without having a survey of how many people are recognizing our water is really bad? This situation has been existing for many years. There are many years of this history has happened that I personally, for a short period of time, I have seen that effect on mine. And trust me, I have 9 filters. And when I have come to the water factory and I ask for the records, they say they lost the records. I really have a hard time of understanding how could they lose annual records where it's so valuable for them to be able to compare what has happened to our water, regardless of if this is coming from the sky or is coming from contamination from individual companies like waste management dumping, or whatever company is on that path is contaminating our river water, or another factor of what are people dumping. For instance, what's the name of that product that people put on their lawns that is getting a huge lawsuit right now, causes cancer? What is that called? The people put for not getting
Roundup.
Roundup. Thank you. Roundup. So then that would be very clear at that point. Where is the contamination comes from? I really don't think this is a really hard science to be able to figure out. But my question is that what's the obstacle? If you guys can educate me in that, I would be very helpful. And another thing I noticed that a lot of times they're focused on odor. Okay, something in dissipating is completely affect your body as far as does it smell good or not, is versus what it really getting absorbed, not only in our skin levels, because when you're taking a shower and some of the stuff, we do not have receptors on the skin, it gets absorbed. And then you look at the level of contamination when it comes from digestive tract. That's another ball game that we can talk about that further. But if you guys can kind of educate me with that, that would be so helpful, and I'm so grateful.
So there's a lot there. I'm gonna try and address a few of those. So the second half of this presentation is the study relative to our hardness evaluation. So it's taste, odor, and hardness evaluation. So we do have actual data relative to hardness, and hardness is a thing that people have been talking about as an issue with Englewood water. That is one of the primary complaints that we hear, is the water's so hard. We have data, and we've collected that data. So we can show data from Chatfield, data from Union Ave, data from different times a year of what the hardness is. Now, taste and odor are more subjective, and that's something where we need to understand it from a perception perspective, and then work to address that to the degree that we can. And there are ways that we can do that. We can use more processes that use carbon, which carbon filters, which will help address taste and odor as a potential issue impacting the water. As far as contamination, the water that we pull is the water from the Platte. It's where the majority or a number of water providers pull their water. And so we have a treatment process that addresses the constituents in that water and produces the water according to what's required by the Colorado Department of Health and Environment and the EPA. And so that's why we have the extensive treatment processes that we have in order to treat whatever's in the water. I think all of that is part of what we are trying to get a handle on. Part of it is data, but part of it is also perception of customers, because we can have all the data we want, but if we're not moving the perception of customers in terms of what they're actually experiencing, then how can we actually measure success in terms of the product that we're providing to our customers? That's what we're looking at. So it's a multi-pronged approach to addressing these issues.
So if I may ask that, then if considering going by EPA standard, then if that is true, then maybe you can educate me in this space. Then every city and every county water should be equally the same amount.
Well, there are standards that are established by the EPA that we have to meet. And so whether
there is a
those are
minimal
met or
standards.
exceeded.
Yes. So then, which was, I think that was the reason that last year we had some problems with that, right? That it just wasn't satisfying. So there is the minimum
Well,
standard.
that's a different issue. So last year is a different issue. That's two different things.
Okay. So as far as understanding then, and this is Peter, right, speaking?
Yes.
Yes, okay, I could recognize. Thank you for educating me, Peter. So, so for instance, when you look at the water in New York or California versus the water we have in Colorado, of course, their level of hardness and the contaminants, like for instance, you look at fluoride in New York and California versus ours is much higher. Or look at oxycodone. There's so much oxycodone in California water that the fish are all contaminated and they're all drowsy. So the question becomes that, where can we as a resident, can we just actually go look at that and say, okay, here's the minimal standard for what EPA wants, and it requires every city to follow, and where do we stand with that?
Well,
that would be one factor, right?
Right. So we produce a report that's required every year by the state. It's called the Consumer Confidence Report, and that actually lists out the levels associated with the parameters that we are annually required to report on. That comes out in it comes out in June. We're anticipating getting out hopefully early June this year. So that basically is our annual summary of how we met the requirements of from a standards perspective. Also within that, we have to report the issues that we've had relative to paperwork violations that have occurred. We have to report the boil water order from last year. So this is basically a report of everything that's occurred with the water system over the last year. That comes out in June and is mailed to every single customer in the
right. Yeah, I have last year's, and I really appreciate that. I think that's very important. I thank you guys for all of that. But then in that space, how many elements they look for? When I read that report, I only saw a few elements that they were looking for, and that is set by Colorado, or is that set by EPA?
I am not exactly sure which one is the one that officially establishes it, or if it's basically the Clean Water Act, which is promulgated by the EPA, but then it's delegated down to the states to implement. And so it's really both.
Okay. And then so when we look at that, so of course the differentiation comes in where do we get this sample from? Because when you look at like people that residents like me that I'm a neighborhood, they're all complaining about the quality of the water, and on a daily basis it changes. And so when I made a visit to the water factory, and they said depends on how much of that water they mix with the reservoir water. Right, which is actually a sewer water that is being treated. Am I understanding?
Point of order, Chair. Can I interrupt, Chair?
Yes.
I feel like I appreciate Ms. Freeman's questions here, but I'm not sure they're exactly relevant to the agenda item here. And I would be interested in hearing the rest of the presentation on taste, odor, and hardness. Maybe we could arrange to have some of her questions answered in a future meeting, or get some, or in a communication from staff or something like that. I really would like to see this presentation continue.
I appreciate that, but I thought my questions are considering taste and odor, as he's mentioning. Do I need to schedule a separate time so I can get more information from you, Peter?
I think we're already in the process of doing that based on our conversation from Saturday. My staff is reaching out to you to set up an individual meeting with you for a few hours to talk through many of these questions. So I feel like that's already underway.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you. Peter, continue.
I see Member Boreski has his hand up. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Ty, go ahead.
Yeah, one quick question back on the survey. Was this focused on homeowners and single family? Was it addressed for commercial users and multifamily, or is it just all? Sorry, it was a while ago since I took it.
Yeah, it wasn't targeted specifically. It did go to every single customer's bill. So yes, it would have reached all single family residents as well as commercial and multifamily properties.
But there was no categories to classify them this year.
This year, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, I think we're clear.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to Steve. And Steve, I'll run the slides unless you want to take control here.
Nope, I'm fine with you running them. I'll just let you know when we're ready. Okay, so I wanted to highlight some of the few activities that we've been performing related to addressing taste, odor, and hardness issues. Really important was the completion of the master plan back in 2020 that did recommend a suite of projects that are targeted for taste and odor. That, as all of you are aware, result in a rate and fee adjustment that then allowed us to move forward with these various other projects in operational studies to determine how we can best resolve those issues. Next slide, please. And so I wanted to point out that these aesthetic issues are not safety issues. So as Director Van Rij mentioned, that the water is meeting all of the regulatory requirements that we are required to do. But did want to point out some of the characteristics that come with that taste and odor. And this may be familiar with those of you that earthy, grassy, swampy type characteristics. These can often be really informative for the source of that, and whether that's a raw water quality issue, water age, which is how long water actually it moves throughout the distribution system, can also impact that. Next slide, please. So one of the key aspects of the taste and odor study was to do water quality testing, and we did that through various points through the raw water and delivery system and treated water delivery system. I did want to highlight this this data related to the hardness, and we spoke about that earlier, but this is comparing the hardness that we received from the South Platte River at our Union Avenue intake and the water that we are able to take through the city ditch. And what this was really compelling evidence to show what really felt to be true was that when we are able to access water directly from Chatfield Reservoir via city ditch, that it's better water quality. And the data that we took over this period late last summer did align with that. Next slide, please. So in terms of the findings of the study, as we assess the water quality issues, the water quality testing, to come up with various capital improvement and operational improvements that can be made. So there are process improvements that can be made at the treatment plant, including a softening facility directly targeted towards hardness removal. There are distribution system optimization options for us that can help reduce that water age that can contribute to taste and odor issues. Next slide, please. City ditch piping, which we've talked about on multiple occasions with this board. That's the project that's really going to allow us to move more water through that through the city ditch system and reap those water quality benefits from taking more water through that system. And then finally, the Big Dry Creek diversion project. I think most of the board is familiar with that as well. That is a project that allows us to divert the Big Dry Creek from directly upstream of our Union Avenue intake to downstream. One of the lessons we get on why water quality testing is important to take seasonally throughout the year is that what can be true during a certain period of time may not be true in another period of time. And that's one of the things that we were able to discover over this winter, the impact over the winter period that the impact that can have on the Big Dry Creek water quality, and also the impact that has on the river water that we take in through the Union Avenue intake. So we've touched on this a couple of times. One of the really important lessons from this is it's not a single magic bullet that's going to solve all of the issues related to taste, odor, and hardness. It's a multifaceted approach. So there are capital improvements that can be made. There are operational improvements made, and collectively, these are what can address our taste and odor and hardness issues moving forward.
And can I just add to what Steve said there relative to on that hardness chart? You can see water coming out of Chatfield is relatively stable. whereas water coming down Union Ave is fluctuates significantly. And that becomes even more of a challenge for people who have filters on their system or have designed filters, things like that. When they see these significant fluctuations in hardness based on source water, that becomes a challenge for them as well. So that's where, again, the data is pointing us to stabilizing and eliminate or reducing the hardness by connecting directly to Chatfield.
All right, it looks like we have a number of questions. I am going to ask the board. We're down to just 11 minutes and we still have a number of issues we've got to cover. So hopefully we can get through some of these questions quickly, but let's go ahead. Caitlin, Joe, then Marshawn.
Oh, my question as far as the hardness, as you see the decline in like June and July and then back up in September, is that really just related to water flow? That it kind of, because of the water years, it's that high peak in the summer and then the water drops from the mountains?
Those are, that is one aspect of it. Another is rain events. Rain events can really significantly impact the water quality in the river.
Okay, thank you.
Joe. I'm sorry, Joe. Joe next.
Thanks, John. Steve, is the measurement for the hardness in the city ditch, is that where it comes into the water treatment plant, or is that coming out of Chatfield?
That is taken, I believe that's taken as it comes into the plant. I can confirm that, but I believe that's where that sample was taken.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Marshawn.
Yes, I was wondering that when you say old water, what are you referring to? Age of the water?
That's how long water exists in a system. So from the point in time that, I'm sitting at the plant here. So when it comes out of the plant to when the user actually accesses it through their system, it's how long that water has resided in the system until its final point of use.
So you're not referring to the storing that in the reservoir, actually?
No.
Referring to that? No.
No, that's the age. That's the period of time between when the water is pumped from the facility out into the distribution system to where it actually gets to its final point of use.
And so how long is that normally? Is that a daily, hourly? What is that?
It can vary based on where a customer is in the system. So customers that are at the fringes of systems will typically have a higher water age because the water takes longer to get to that customer.
Okay, and then
So let me add to that. So for our system, we have a very small, tight system. So we have actually low water ages compared to large spread out systems like Aurora and other systems like that. Their systems, so some of the water ages that I used to work with on some of the other systems are are weeks that water takes to move through the system. Ours generally are, within a few days. So because of the size, our system is so small, we actually don't have a lot of significant water age issues. So just from a perspective side.
I just wanted to make sure that my terminology and my understanding was correct, that I wasn't confusing how long you guys store that in the reservoirs is part of that aging. So that because it could be a factor then, right? No?
I guess storing in the reservoir, which
yeah, like if you're storing the water somewhere, that could be a factor on what happens to that water.
Well, if it's any raw water source, it's not as significant of a factor because we have treatment processes that handle it. If there's some kind of the place that we store water within the system is in the elevated tanks, and so that's where we look at how we move the water through those tanks. Mm-hmm. And that's really where you get storage in the system.
Okay, and then my other question, and this was, if I could ask yours, is that isn't it the amount of in winter the reason that the water becomes hard because of all the salts that is put on the streets?
And I don't know if we determined that directly, but I mean there is a lot of runoff from streets that occurs, and so. I don't know did we actually study linkage to the hardness Steve,
But-
or we've not gotten that far.
When I went to
We did
the,
not. We did
when I
not
went
set
to
a
the water
recommendation.
factory, that's what they told me. When I
Yeah, and
went-
that's, and so we don't have defined data of the linkage of that, but yes, rock salt is a hardness thing that ends up dissolved and runs off into the river. To the degree to which we know how much that's having an effect, we haven't dug into the data to that level, but anecdotally, what I think you can say that that's true. As water, more salt influenced water or mag chloride influenced water ends up in South Platte, then it increases that dissolved solids amount.
Well, maybe that's something we should look at as far as what is the contributing factor to that as well. Thank you for answering my questions.
Sure.
Okay, I think that's for questions. I am looking, I believe there's actually 5 things yet to cover. So I'm going to ask about, I mean, Peter, maybe you can help me on prioritization. I think
Yep.
probably the most important thing left is actually to first cover the potential council. Sarah, it's something you mentioned to me earlier, if we want the board's input on the water rights discussion.
Yeah, so I think that's a really actually, and that's under staff's choice. I think it was under.
Yeah, I think it's a late ad.
It is a late ad.
Yeah. Mhm.
So here's what essentially what we're working on right now is we've prepared a water resources, for lack of a better term, raw water strategy document, and it's not even a document. It's more of a set of plan. It's a guideline plan. It's nothing that would be produced publicly, but it helps guide the how we use and utilize our water rights and our water system from a raw water perspective. So because it's sensitive information, we would propose to do a joint executive session with the council to talk through strategy so that the council and the Water and Sewer Board have an understanding of how we approach that aspect of our system, which is more falls under the attorney-client privilege due to how sensitive water rights are within the state of Colorado. So our plan right now is we're looking at the first week in June to have that joint meeting. I think the date is June 6th that we're targeting. And so we just wanted to, we thought doing it all at once would be a good way to make sure that everybody's getting the same level of consistent information. And then we're protecting that executive, the rights and confidentiality of that in one meeting.
I think the question for the board is, are you willing to do a joint session on a Monday? Or alternative is just ask that we do it separately on our normal schedule. Is there any concerns about doing the joint session for efficiency with council?
Was there a set time?
Was it usually 5:30s on Monday?
That's
Council starts at 6.
Pardon?
Council starts at 6, and so I don't. Sarah, did they come up with it? Did they suggest a time?
They have not suggested a time, but I can work with the city clerk's office to understand when that would be, because it would also fall on a regular session for city council.
okay.
Would it be remote, joint, or hybrid, or remote, in person, or hybrid?
We actually, council just did a meeting a couple weeks ago on the capital plan that I believe that was joint. It was hybrid or it was both. It was hybrid and remote and in person.
It'll have to be in person for an executive session.
Oh, fair point.
That's our policy, I think, right now.
Yeah, and Councilmember Anderson, are those typically held at the end of the meeting?
Typically they're later in the meeting. Yes, because there's an audience there, and that people will often leave when an executive session starts. And so we don't like to put those close to the beginning typically.
So this wouldn't go in the study session slot. This would go later on the Monday schedule.
Yeah, and June 6th, it would probably be pretty late just because, I mean, I'm guessing they would probably have regular items to approve as well.
Yeah, so nothing's firmed up yet. This is actually, we're trying to figure out the most efficient way to brief the Water and Sewer Board and the council on sensitive executive privilege type of information.
Why don't we see if something comes out? I'm gonna suggest I'm a little concerned that we'll lose too many board members if we are really late on the Monday schedule. But if we can see what maybe is working out and run it by email back by the board. See if
I
that might
will
work.
make sure I show up if that's important. I will be there.
You know, I think it'd be really important to discuss with the city clerk that a Monday evening that we have a very light schedule. Because if you get into public hearings or anything like that, you know, it could be 10:30, 11 at night. So if a light schedule is important for that.
And there's no real rush on this. This is just more of a, there's been questions about more of our broader, how does our water supply system work, that we've gotten, and we felt it was, and we've worked on this strategy work over the last couple of years. And so we thought it'd be a good thing to discuss. So there's no real pressing issue on this. It's just more to be informative and to have a discussion with council and water sewer board to make sure that you're an understanding of what we do as it relates to that aspect of the system.
Then it seems like the obvious answer is just not do it on a formal council night. Do it on a study session only night.
So we cannot have an executive session on a study session night. We can work with the city clerk to make it a special meeting, but it would have to be a regular council meeting.
I didn't remember that rule, or the rule changed. I'm open. We're not going to get. I would not expect we'll get full board participation if we're hanging on till. I mean, maybe Jim, maybe you have the best solution that let's at least make sure it's a light night. And I just want to make sure it's arranged such that we can get substantially full participation from the board.
And I don't think it would be, I don't think it would be out of the question to have a special meeting on a study session night. We've done that for executive sessions before, so that would be an option as well.
Okay, that's what my memory was. Okay, see if we can work something out. Get back.
I think that's great. I think that's great feedback for us. We'll go back and so maybe the 6th is a bit too aggressive. We'll see what we can come up with in terms of looking at schedule and seeing if we can get a special meeting on a study session night to keep it earlier in the evening.
Okay. Looking at the agenda, I mean, maybe the Wifi loan update we could do quickly, and then I'm curious if the other 3 items could just defer till next month.
We can definitely defer 6B, 7A, and 7B. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
so really it's the Wifi update I think is the most important. And then I have one last thing that's not on the agenda, which is really quick.
All right.
So yeah, I'll be really quick on the Wifi update. So good news, the sewer loan closed on April 26th with an interest rate of 2.86%. So yes, this happened the week before the Fed most recently raised rates by 50 basis points. So turning to the water loan, we have discussed with EPA to include some additional language around the conditions precedent to fund disbursement within the loan agreement that allows us to close the loan and lock the interest rate, and then gives us time to work through the state historic preservation issues that we discussed at the last meeting. So we are currently scheduled to close the loan on June 11th. And this is actually a week again before the Fed meets to discuss interest rates, where they may raise them once again in June. So interest rates have risen in a bit in the last couple of weeks, and they were at 3.1% today when I checked. So happy to answer any questions related to that.
Thank you so much for all your great work. So grateful.
Good. Don't see any questions. So Peter, you get the final subject.
Yeah, one last update. So we've had a staff departure, and so I just want to recognize, so Steve Simon will be leaving us in the next week or so. I think a week from today is his last day. Steve has decided to go off and go be a consulting in the water industry, or go be a consultant in the water industry. And so he's been here for 2 years. He's done a lot of work to help ramp up the engineering and ramp up the project execution for the city with all the projects that we have underway. And so I just wanted to say thanks and let the board know that this would be Steve's last meeting, and we appreciate what he's done for the city.
Steve, I'll echo that. Thank you very much for the help you've given us, and the board wishes you the best of luck in your next adventure. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks to Steve it's been a pleasure learning from you and working with you these last couple of years. Really enjoyed it. We'll miss you.
Very welcome. I can tell you this has been the most rewarding and impactful 2 years of my career. And I'm really grateful to have been given the opportunity, and look forward to seeing the great things that are ahead for this organization.
Thank you.
Very good.
If there's anything critical from the board, I'll let you slide that in. Otherwise, we'll move to adjournment. Anything that is urgent? Great. Appreciate everyone's running a little extra time tonight. And I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks
See
all.
y'all.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate all your work.